Hey, so good to have you with us in our special time with two very special people as we speak to issues of the day and bring some wisdom, hopefully, wisdom from God to help us get better, be stronger, be the people that God has called us to be. And I've invited two very special friends, um, professionals, a banker,
Yes.
an executive with Amazon, and great people in our church. So, Carmen Goers, thanks for being here today, and appreciate your time and your wisdom in our current circumstances. And Raveena Broomfield, thank you for being here. Part of the family, and yet we feel pain, we feel heartache, we feel ashamed. As white Americans, I feel ashamed of some of the things going on. So I thought, let's talk about it. Let's try to find answers and understanding. So maybe to get the conversation started, you guys tell me of your experience as Black Americans, growing up, family life, professional life, anything you think kind of gives some context to your perspective. Carmen, why don't you go first?
So I was actually born in Detroit, Michigan, and moved to California in the early 70s. Grew up predominantly white areas. I was privileged to have a private school education, went to Catholic school, went to Jesuit college, and often was the only Black or one of few that were in the area. And I started off in the School of Engineering, moved to School of Business later on, and played basketball, was athletic, enjoyed that. We were military, lived overseas and came back. So we've lived in Georgia, Oklahoma, California, here in Washington, and being African American looks differently, or you have to act differently many times. In college, I found that people often wanted to be my friend or wanted to reach out but didn't know how, and they were afraid. They didn't want to offend. And Jesuits are nice people. I mean, there's a nice religion. They didn't want to offend, but they didn't know how to introduce themselves. So I would try to introduce and always initiate when I thought there was a friendly face there, but it didn't always seem reciprocated. Like, why don't you be courageous? Won't you be courageous? And
Why are you waiting for me to make it happen?
When I'm the minority in the room, so theoretically my rejection will, is on display. But that's often the question I would think is, why don't you reach your hand towards me? Why don't you even smile?
Wow.
And so that was kind of that part. I've raised 3 daughters plus a bonus daughter. I have four grandchildren plus 2 bonus grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And they have the same thing. They've been in private schools. They've been multicultural. We decided to live in Seattle, actually, because of the diversity that we had here. When we were stationed here back in the 90s, and I was like, you could marry, an Eskimo could marry a Samoan here. You just don't know. And it seemed very open to that. And it wasn't until we really moved here and settled in that you see little nuances of there's still some disparity in that.
Sure.
So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
But having military background gives another perspective there when we get to some of the protesting the flag or the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's make sure we talk about that in a few moments.
Okay.
Raveena, how's your experience?
Yeah, so I'm from Chicago, the south side of the city.
We got Detroit, we got Chicago.
Midwest connection over here. A couple things I think are unique in my experience. I was raised by a single dad, so as a Black American, you hear a lot of negative things on the position of fathers in children's lives or in the household, but I have a great relationship with my dad, so that's something that's very unique and personal to me. I think the other thing, somewhat similar to what she shared, I grew up and went to gifted school. So what that meant was at age 6, first grade, I was being bused 30 minutes outside of my Southside Chicago neighborhood to a very white neighborhood to attend elementary school that you had to test to get into it, but it was like essentially intentionally designed by race. So it would be 50% Black, 30% white, 20% Hispanic. So it was forced diversity in a way, but for 6-year-olds. And that is really where I learned about racism. And it wasn't from my classmates, because we kind of had fun learning differences about one another. Hair texture. I remember going to a white friend's house and learning what couscous was for dinner. But
That's funny.
at age 7, our playground was actually victimized by the KKK. And this is where I learned of a hate crime as
Detroit.
a 7-year-old in Chicago.
In Chicago.
There were like swastikas on the playground, all things that I didn't even know what they were. And so literally my dad had to explain to me what that symbol was, what the KKK was, to a 7-year-old.
Wow.
Like, this is the 90s in Chicago. And so for me, that was my first understanding of like, oh, there's imminent danger around me, potentially, that I didn't even feel, like I wasn't aware of. College, somewhat similar as well. I went to a private university, but I always thought it was fun being kind of one of few. The way I thought of it from an athlete standpoint was like, oh, I get to be the Jackie Robinson of my classroom. That was a little saying me and my dad had when I was younger. I was really into sports, and so that was always motivating for me. College was similar. I was a finance major, so there weren't as many Black, especially Black females studying finance at the time, but it always felt kind of fun. There would be comments here or there that would be, kind of shocking to hear in student life, professional life. I think fast forwarding into corporate environment, so I wish I was an executive at Amazon. I'm like a principal product manager, but on my way to executive for sure. But I think one of the things that's interesting in corporate America is, for me to be where I am, I've really had to learn how to exist in white spaces. I've had white teachers, white best friends, white classmates. I've sort of had to, but for my white colleagues to be in that same meeting with me, they still may have never met or had a close relationship with a Black person. So I could still be their first Black interaction, which I had my first white interactions at 6. So I'm like at a boardroom, and you're like a 6-year-old to me in terms of your understanding, your ability to have conversations or engage. And it's very interesting to feel like that responsibility for me to gut check, how old are you in this interaction right now? Because I know I'm at least 30 years into it, and you might be 3 days into it. Wow. And that's a very interesting reality in every work scenario for me.
Yeah, I would say that concurs. My immediate team leader confessed Tuesday, Wednesday of this past week. He's like, Carmen, I'm sorry, you're the only African American I know, so I know this must be hard, but tell me how to help you. Tell me what I can do. I can't imagine if my son, that would never happen. It just wouldn't happen. Right. And so I can't imagine, but you have to help me and tell me, as blatantly as you need to, and humbly, he's like humbly asking for information, but he's 46 years old, and he's an executive. He's a senior vice president, and this is the first time he's had to. He says, my wife is crying, and I don't know what to say or what to do.
Well, we're not asking you to represent all Black people in America, but thank you for at least adding your voice to the conversation. Wow, I can't imagine those kind of experiences. Obviously, I grew up in a white family, in a white community, in a white school, and at 19, actually met the man who became my spiritual father, who was a Black man. And that was the beginning of everything changing for me. So I'm about 45 years into this.
Still older than me.
Yeah, at least I'm not a baby, right?
Good point.
At least I'm not a baby. Let's talk about our current circumstances. Being in military, I don't hear you saying you hate America, you hate the military, you hate the police, but we do have a problem, a systemic, racist problem that causes Black men to be killed when they're unarmed, when it's unnecessary. And it's not just Chicago or Detroit, it's here in Tacoma we're dealing with a Black man recently killed. How do you process that? What do you see there?
The difficulty in processing is almost no matter what you do, coming at it from a hate perspective of I'm going to arm myself and go fight, or if I try to do it peacefully with my hands out, the chance of getting shot 2 bullets to the chest is a reality. And so I reached out to you, when you spoke to me, and I was like, what's that guy's name? Because it's about my in-group and out-group, and how do I look at this from being a Christian and not just an African-American woman? Because while we see our black men getting killed, it's becoming more prominent for black women to get killed in our beds, in our homes that we own, not rent. We're owners, and you think you're safe and you're secure because you've got to a certain level, and that's not there. So it takes, I constantly have to check my fear gauge and operate, and I started yoga just because we can't go anywhere, you know. But there's a lot of what can I do, and I am blessed. I have had a great church family. I've had a great work family where people, volunteer family, I've called and says, I didn't realize how unaware I was, Carmen. I mean, we've been friends for 10 or 20 years. I didn't realize that these little microaggressions were coming. And I said, and why didn't you tell me? I'm like, I didn't think you were in a place to hear. So it's been kind of that ability to check your friends in a loving manner, but if you're not humble to receive, then it's again, it falls back to the, you know, to rejecting of me. So it's a force.
Well, and you can't let fear take over, can
Right.
you? Not long ago, I asked you to be the president of our school board.
Yes.
Sorry for that. But you.
I think I led with I'm a warrior chick. I could do this.
Yep,
Yeah.
you always have led
Yeah.
with that. But you're fearless, and you're facing battles there that
Yes.
are hard battles. But yeah, as Christians, we just choose faith, not fear, right?
So in college, I was at a Jesuit school, I told you, but Ephesians 6 became my warrior cry. Like, I'm a warrior chick. All my armor and gear is right here, so we got to go forward, because going back, there's no options back there. So it became a little more it hurt my heart more as I became a parent. And we were transitioning from Fort Lewis up here at the time down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and driving. And, you know, military families, you're just on the road, you're just, you know, and you're kind of caravanning with some people. And we pulled over to a rest stop, let the kids run around. And my daughter at the time was barely 5 or 6. And so I'm like, go run. And she's military, go make a friend. And so this family, she said, hey, you want to play? And the kid says, I don't play with niggers. And she says,
wow.
oh no, we're the Moors. And I was like, Jazz, we're gonna find I just said her whole name.
Wow.
I said, we're gonna find someone else to play with. And she's like, all right. And then she kept, because in the military, everyone's a Smith, a Jackson, and there's different nationalities. So she didn't know that was a bad name. And so when you said your story, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, child, she hasn't heard. And it was the, you know, mid 90s. And they yelled it. And it was like, there's a park full of people, and no one said anything to that family. All I could do was protect my child, because all she wanted was someone to play with, and which she did eventually find. And so you start getting more protective, but how do I let you explore and protect you? And now I have grandsons, and I didn't know how little boys listened. They just can't stay still. And so to think that we're gonna go out, okay, I need you to stay really close to grandma, and they just bolt. And I have, you know, a stepson as well, and he's white, and so he can bolt, and his dad's no fear. I'm like, get back to me right now. And he's like, let them just be boys. And I'm like, we have a different dynamic. And so for us now as an interracial couple with children, grandchildren, he's like, you stay on security because you can see what I don't see, but I'm gonna let them be boys because I'm a man and boys need to do these things. And so we're finding a balance there, but it's been really hard because my heart races, and I sit there and pray at the playground, the Holy Spirit, like, okay, and I'm watching to see how parents interact and react to my grandchildren who, you know, they just wanna play.
It's just, for me, it's unimaginable that kind of stuff still happens or happened in your life. I mean, that's not a law. Sometimes we want to say, yeah, well, slavery was a long time ago. Really wasn't that long ago.
Right.
And those kind of things are still a reality.
Yeah.
Tragic. Raveena, do you think your dad instilled that faith, not fear spirit in you? As Carmen calls it, the warrior chick. You kind of got that same spirit.
Yeah, I think for sure. One thing that was fun growing up with my dad was he said he always wanted us to have a voice. So we would be able to have fun conversations right away, maybe even challenging conversations about things if I disagreed or had a strong point of view. And so I learned to have a voice as a child. And I think as a little girl, that's important. As a little Black girl, is probably 5x important, that you understand how to engage and how to have a conversation with people that are different from you, age gaps, et cetera. And so my dad really helped me understand, like, my opinion mattered, and me understanding what was going on also mattered. So, like, let's engage.
Yeah.
And so I think that really gave me confidence when talking to other people, because I felt like more comfortable in conversation. I think even now I'm like probably friends with my friends' parents as much as I am them, like even my friends from high school. So I think that helped me feel like I could engage in any space. But I would say my dad too, he's a Black man from the South, like he's from Mississippi. And so his understanding of race is still like very different from mine in terms of the cautions you need to take. Like how do you move in this space versus that space? I remember one time we were talking about work and like happy hours, and he's like, that's a test. Like, don't ever like participate in that. Like, you think they're inviting you to a social event, but they're just watching. You know?
Wow.
It's still very different. His perception and his reality with his age
What
group
he's
and
been
gender.
through.
Been through,
So he definitely gives me a lot of confidence, but also tells me the rules of engagement that sometimes I disagree with, and we have spirited debates about those disagreements. But I definitely agree that a lot of my kind of confidence and positive outlook comes from him.
Yeah.
It's hard to say to hurting people, use your faith, don't be a victim, rise above. But Julius, my spiritual father, had spent 20-some years in prison and dealing with his addictions, but the abuse of police and guards, pretty traumatic. I mean, what he went through. And still, he was able to teach me, you have to fight for faith and decide you're not going to be a victim. And I'm probably not the one to say that to people who are hurting today, but you guys exemplify that. So thank you. And by the way, you do not look like a grandmother. You have to be the youngest grandma
A legitimate age. Yeah.
Let's talk about how in America our current circumstances affect you. So your husband's white.
Correct.
Your family now, so it's mixed. Your husband's Black, but from South Africa, so that's a little different perspective than a African American. What do you feel in our current situation? On the job, you're probably getting some talk because people are trying to figure out how do we respond to this. What do you feel in church when you come to Christian faith? Give us your insight on that.
Well, looking forward to coming back to church.
Yes.
So that
this
will be
week we're back.
This week we're back. So I'm not. Do you want to start on work?
I'll start with work. So Monday, kind of coming out of last weekend, which was probably the height of things for me, at least. I would say it was one of the few times that positive disposition was really just kind of stripped, where no matter what you've accomplished, where you are, like whatever success or security you think you've established, if Blackness is the weapon, then you are always armed. So what does that mean? And so I go into Monday leading a team meeting. It's my meeting every Monday. It's how I kick off the week.
Are you the only Black person in the meeting?
I'm the only Black person in the meeting. There are a couple of Asian people in that meeting and majority white. So I'm like, all right, normally I kick off the week, how was your weekend? Where did you get takeout? Because we're all working remotely, so we kind of talk about shows we've been watching. And I just couldn't do it. So when the meeting was supposed to start, I messaged like, let's start 5 minutes after. Because I realized I hadn't really prepared for transitioning into the workday. I couldn't have the high energy that I normally have, and so how can I kick off this meeting? So I bought myself 5 minutes and was like, stretch, get coffee. But it was really because I wasn't ready to transition into the space of a leader. I was trying to figure out what can I say. And so when the meeting started, I just was honest about the events of the weekend, and I think we all need to reflect, but also figure out your process in this time. And, it was like suddenly I had to lead this group of people who definitely didn't experience this weekend the way I experienced it, but I couldn't just start the day like I normally would.
Yeah. Well, you were emotionally impacted, mentally impacted.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And so I think what was interesting, what was surprising about this for me is that it felt different, right? I told you I experienced a direct hate crime in my own life at the age of 7. So I've seen racism many times. I had a coworker once tell me, like, I'm basically not black because I could have a conversation with him. And I was like, wow. So, you know, and that was in Seattle, and I've lived here 8 years, so that wasn't that long ago, right?
Wow.
And so you get kind of used to these things, but this has felt bigger. And I think the reason it's felt bigger is, for me, this is the first time I've seen a collective group of non-black people speak about injustice, and not just my friends texting me. So it's felt different to the point where, like, oh, I think other people are noticing this too now. It's not, maybe it's beyond being a black complex or a black issue, which is how I grew up thinking that it was. And so I think for me, going into work, and we've had countless meetings across our organization, I have a great privilege to interact with members of our S team, which is essentially the C-suite of Amazon. And so we've had many conversations this week with people that, you know, more broadly externally, you may think they don't have any thoughts on these topics or they aren't saying anything, but it's actually super like heartfelt to be able to engage with them and hear their points of view and talk about what Amazon is doing as a company internally and externally. And so I think finally it feels like non-black people care about what's happening.
Good. And hopefully that feels supported, right?
Yeah.
Feels like we're not alone. Yeah. Carm?
It was different. It was, we had an 8:30 a.m. team kickoff meeting, or a regional kickoff meeting. Since COVID-19, we've had weekly and sometimes daily conversations about managing. We're in banking, adjusting to the PPP, facilitating customer needs, keeping that going. And they started the day just like every other day. And so when we got off that call, I was like, you're going to act like this didn't happen. So I called my team lead and says, I'm disappointed, hurt, that I can't breathe today. I'm showing up and I'm having a difficult time to even produce. Like right now I am faking it. And I come in with high energy. I'm a team cheerleader. We can do this, rally the troops, just buckle down. Tell me what you need for me to help me do it, da-da-da-da-da. And I was flat and I couldn't breathe. And I went into the office, and we have, we're working remotely, but we have cameras in our offices, so we're not in the same room. And he says, you look distressed. And I says, I am distressed. And it's like coming off of, I says, the fact that a man died with another man's knee on his neck, and you're starting the meeting off like this, where the prior Monday, we talked about the woman in the park with the birder who was choking the dog, and we talked about how they took the dog from that woman and how that was, I says, we spent more time on that. And I said, and my voice cracked, I was like, I'm hot. I'm so hot. And he's like, well, it's uncomfortable. I says, what you say is, I'm sorry this is going on. How are you processing? And you know, he referred me to our employee assistance program and said, maybe you want to take a couple of days off. And I was like, so it's me, I'm the problem. And so as we went through the week, we kept having these conversations because he would start the days off with, okay, our production tools are this, and and we're transitioning, and we're doing a great job. We need you guys to blah, blah, blah. And I says, no one's addressing this. And there's barely a handful of officers that are people of color. And so I started calling all of them, how you doing? Did you hear from anyone? How you doing? I'm not a senior level officer. And so I went to the senior level and I was like, is it me? Am I just over inflamed by this? And they want us at 8:05 to just do your job and then leave. I called my regional leader and went through this conversation with him. And he says, you know, employee assistance there if you have difficulty processing. And I says, you know, one thing I know about you is you like your lawn. You relax by going home and cutting your lawn and having your angles such and such. And that brings you joy. And when your wife does it, it upsets you, but you know, she tries. And we giggle, I says, and laugh to get to know. I says, you're not treating me as a human being. I'm a production tool. And I'm having difficulties with that. And so he's like, okay. So then I wrote a stern email because now I've done this. And I was nervous to send it, had a couple people read it for me, took a day to pray, come back, still felt the need, sent it through tears. I sent this email out, heartfelt email, to them to respond with, give us a couple days to think about how we want to respond back to you. We need to process. When they get back on the phone with me, and by now our CEO has not made a public statement internally or externally, and I could tell you the team or the African-American employees were like, what's he gonna do?
Right.
And his first wave of communication was out of touch. And when he called me, he says, well, I heard that you're upset about you sent the letter. I says, yeah, my job's on the line. He says, oh, you should never worry about that. I says, oh, like Kaepernick hasn't gotten paid in 4 years? That was public, and everybody co-signed on him losing his job over taking a knee, not even saying a word. When they asked him about it, he expressed why he was doing it, but he lost his job and has thus for the last 4 years. So what would happen to me in a bank like this? I'm an officer at will employment state. I could lose my job because now I'm creating a problem. Because everyone around me seems that there's a problem with Carmen, and I am frustrated and angry and mad that you don't see that there's not a problem with me, but in the world that around me that brings me into work. Want you work from home, want you, everything that, and so I says, you're not hearing me. So I called the senior VP who is of Hispanic descent, and I rattled off to him all these things, and he says, I'll call you back. And he says, you know, back in the day, I used to do the same thing, Carmen. I was at a large corporate bank. I would point it out because we have to come from we have to, this is what he said, we have to realize that maybe you don't know that what you're doing is offensive. Maybe you don't know that watching another man die brings trauma to me, even though I've never had a knee on my neck. Maybe you don't know that a community is hurting and not just looting. Maybe you don't know. And I kept saying, I'm confused by how you don't know. But we have to assume our leadership doesn't know. So we're going to break this down. And he was gracious enough to go straight to the CEO with my letter and information. Unbeknownst to me, another one went up to the CEO. So by Friday afternoon, we were talking, it comes out. But it's like, okay, Carmen, are you happy now? Are you happy now? And there was a protest in Tacoma, and they shut that off and said, okay, everybody get out of here before the protesters start. I'm like, why don't we take a time to see what the protesters are doing? And everybody bugged back to Gig Harbor, Lake Tapps, you know, and my regional lead says, Carmen, I don't see color. And I says, I have that hard to believe because you live in Lake Tapps, you don't live on Rainier Beach. Both are bodies of water you can have your boat on, but there's a reason you live in Lake Tapps. And then there's silence. But I will return to Monday and see how they process through, but we are constantly having to gauge how much can you handle of a truth or reality. And if they're on the other side is not humble to receive, I then have to think, is this an organization I want to be with? Well, that's my livelihood and my career. Okay, this is what I do. It's not who I am. God will provide. I'm really good at what I do. And it's those, I don't know if those are the same conversations you have with yourself, but those are conversations I have to have to rise up. And I've been told, well, you speak really good. You speak really well. It's like, well, that Jesuit education I paid for,
Yeah, what are you trying to say?
Yeah, I can beat you a scramble.
So really, Carmen, you're sharing two painful realities. One is people around you that don't know the reality of your community, your people. And two is thinking you're the problem.
I'm the problem.
That because you're upset or because you're hurting, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
It's a double whammy, isn't it? It's like, wow. And this is current issues. This isn't our history. This is our reality today. Yeah. Raveena, does Zola view it differently coming from South Africa?
The short answer is yes. I think we had some of our first conversations during the week. It was interesting. Over the weekend, he was having final exams, so I was really absorbing everything that was happening kind of by myself. And so my moods were just sporadic. I would be less angry, a lot more somber. I was just really sad.
Shaken.
And so it wasn't until a few days later that we actually had a conversation about what was happening, other than news topics, but it was here's how I feel about it. And so when we were getting into that conversation, he's lived in the US before, for a few months back when he was doing a study program actually in Minnesota. And now he's lived here in Seattle for maybe 9-10 months. So his U.S. experience isn't lengthy. So we talked about, essentially, it's the same but different. And, you know, for him in South Africa, Black people are a majority of the population. And so he was just comparing that to how the population makeup is. Even in Seattle, like when you look at, they call Seattle diverse, but is it really?
Right.
And so we were just talking about how U.S. cities and states are pretty segregated, and how did that happen? We were just talking about some of the different legal systems that have exist. Like, I live in the Central District, so we talked about what redlining is and how that worked. So it was just interesting to talk through, like, the similarities around being Black, for sure, but then what are the two systems that have been different in our respective countries and in our kind of lifetimes that we've seen? Like, what are all the systems at play? And just kind of talking about how those systems have worked.
Well, I was just talking with a pastor friend in South Africa today, and he said the racial tensions there are at a boiling point, which is normal over there. It's kind of up and down, I guess, similar to what we go through. But it speaks to the reality that humanity struggles, right? It's not just America or Africa. It's humanity struggles to deal with our issues. I think part of it because so much of humanity doesn't know God. So then it becomes self and greed and all kinds of strange motivations. But, well, maybe we can bring some healing, bring some, you know, when you were speaking about starting your meetings, and what do we say? I thought, well, I always start my meetings with prayer. So we're going to pray for our community. Pray. Well, you can't do that.
A little bit different.
Yeah, you can't do that. So, man, that's a difficult spot. Okay, Carm, what should I do? I'm that white guy that you work with. I like you, you're my friend, but I don't know what to do, so I stay quiet. What should I do?
Start the conversation with, I feel your pain.
Okay.
If you can say that, I feel your pain. Is there something that I can personally do? And be willing to act on it, because a lot of times it feels like lip service.
Right.
Like, oh, sweetie, I'm sorry you feel that way. Go take a Advil, you'll be all right. It feels that passive.
Wow.
And so, and so when I've been asked that question, I've made some recommendations. It's like, call, and if you know a person of color, whether you're very close or not, just call and say, as a Christian, I was thinking of you. You came on my heart today, and I just prayed for you. You don't expect a call back, but they'll probably just acknowledge it. Acknowledge that you have privilege. When we do missions overseas, I acknowledge my American privilege. That hot water, I miss it. You know, that comfortable bed, you know, we were talking about Mexico missions back in the day, and there's American privilege that I know I walk into another country with, but acknowledge that you have it here.
Yeah.
And you can say what you like to say without fear that you're going to lose your job over a feeling or an opinion that you think is wrong.
Right.
And that would be the beginning. A little different than you were stating. I was, as diverse as the community of protesters became, it agitated me personally more, because as a Black community, our voice isn't good enough. It's not good enough. And that requires others. I said there's going to be a turning point, because we have 20 to 40-year-old white women now walking with us. They're going to be the game changers, because their voice matters and counts. When a white lady says, I feel threatened by a Black man, the police come full force. And so it's that difference. So and it's a humbling part, because I hate that I felt that way, but I was like, why can't our voice just be enough?
Wow.
Why couldn't it be enough? But yes, I would like you to come alongside me at the same time to show that everyone is upset by this inhumanity to another group. And so that's some of the initial parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have to keep talking enough, and maybe getting enough different voices will get to the systems. And that's where we need change, right? Yeah. Not just one person deciding, I'm not going to be racist, or trying, but the systems changing. That's our goal, is keep the conversation moving to where police departments start making changes. Man, it's a big problem, but governments start making changes. And That's our prayer. That's our hope.
We have put in thoughts and recommendations. For example, police officers, in law enforcement is a difficult job, and if you're seeing the hardest side of humanity all the time, at some point you need to rotate back to middle school and high school security, not security, but rotate in so that you can see that if you meet Matthew at 8th grade and you see Matthew at 20 and Matthew's got a problem, then you say, hey Matthew, and he stops. My high school Sunday school teacher was a LAPD officer. And at the point that I was involved in a protest and they were trying to detain me, his voice, Carmen, he knew me. He knew me well enough to know that here's what you have to do right now because you need to, and it took the fear out of that engagement, but it was a protest. I'll leave it at that.
You had a relationship.
Right.
You had a relationship.
And he knew the students that were involved because of his service, and so we responded to him with respect because we knew he had no ill will towards us. Other officers, we don't know that, and I think that's what a lot of whites don't realize, that the police aren't our friends because they come in with a presumption that someone here is going to jail, someone here is on drugs, something's wrong, and as opposed to you show up at a predominantly white house and the domestic violence gets slid on oh, she's just this, and it gets slid in, and you get pass-bys on a lot of different things. And so that privilege needs to be recognized and call each other out on that as such.
Good. Well, I wrote an article about what can I do to the average white person who's like, okay, I hear you, I'm with you, I'm part of your family as a Christian. And so I said one thing, it may be a small beginning, but some people just need to get some new folks in their circle. Get out of the small, all-white circle. Start to build some relationship. Like you said, when you have a relationship, it builds some trust and some comfort. And not just when there's a crisis, but let's get bigger. Our church has been trying to do that for 40 years, trying to get our leadership team to be multicultural, multiracial, and all of our congregation. We've made a little bit of progress. Let's speak to that as we close here today. What else? What can we say to people when they say, well, what can I do?
Yeah, I think a great thing is not being so obsessed with being action-oriented. Like, a part of what you need to do is listen and have conversations. And so I think opening yourself up to say, I don't understand this. How does this work? How has this been? And being able to really engage in a conversation without feeling like you need to solve a problem right away. I think a second thing is actually pursuing to inform yourself. People Google everything. They watch YouTube videos to fix many things around their house, but you want to text me to ask me how you can learn about racism in America. I think you can Google that. And I think there are books you can read, which I'm happy to read with you or suggest to you, but the helplessness has to go. And so I think have conversations, proactively, self-motivated education would be helpful. And then I think the third thing really, which you touched on around like government, voting, legislation, like trying to have a better understanding of ways that we can have voices be heard collectively in specific communities. That, I've been more proactive in voting probably in the last 4 years than ever before. And really, when trying to vote in King County, like local elections, I'm reading a book. The little booklet doesn't have enough information, so I actually I'm on my computer looking up what is Levy 27 or whatever those things might be. So I think really taking the time to educate ourselves as voters. But to me, the biggest thing is like release the helplessness and learn the way you learn. If you learn through podcasts, then learn about race in America through that. If you learn through reading, then read books. But the pressure can't all be on Black people to do the education and the research and the strategizing and the action plan.
And fixing all the white people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you, There's
Help us. Yeah, good. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Very good.
Yeah, and like you said in your office, it was almost like, okay, put it on you. Well, what should we do? It's like, wait, you guys step up.
Step up, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're stepping up. Our church is stepping up. And let's pray before we go.
Good job.
Father, we pray that your spirit, your strength, your passion, your power is at work in our church family. We pray for Raveena and Carmen and all of our Black community, that you are strengthening, you are bringing help, bringing renewal, bringing healing. We believe, God, you will move us forward into a new season. In Jesus' name, amen.